I'm going to talk about model mayhem. I'm going to talk about the things that sort of impede innovation. I'm going to talk about all the irritating stuff that makes things not happen. So that's why I'm here. I'm really pleased to meet you guys, even though it's really early for me. You know, I'm from Gothenburg, so getting here at this hour is kind of a hassle. Is anybody else from Gothenburg? Wonderful. You guys know what I mean, right? All right. I'm a researcher, so a lot of the things that I'm going to talk to you about today will seem really weird. And I hope that's okay with you guys. If it's too weird, just give me a shout out or give me sort of raise your hand and say, no. Get away from that. Get back to the mainstream. So please try to feel that you're actually part of this. And I'll try to make my best. I work at the at Chalmers University of Technology and Gothenburg University, or the University of Gothenburg, with something called the Digitalization of Society Initiative. So we're working very hard and trying to sort of pool our resources and trying to understand what actually happens when digitalization hits us, right? We've been really good at sort of trying to understand digitization, but not digitalization. Right? So we know digitization, but not digitalization. So that's something that I'll be touching upon. The core sort of underlying data that I'll be utilizing here today is competing on visualization, which is one of our sort of major research programs that's been running since 2013 and will be running until 2017. And what we're studying there is sort of inaptitude to change. Basically, we started out by trying to understand how innovation happens, but since we didn't see any innovation, we quickly sort of turned our head towards why doesn't innovation happen? One of the core findings so far is that, well, the sort of supply and demand model that we put in place in the majority of organizations in terms of IT, as Henrik was talking about, sort of doesn't really give us the prerequisites that we need. So I had a talk at the Förvaltningsdagarna here in Stockholm, and I was approached by a guy responsible for innovation within a major Swedish agency, and he was actually crying because he was trying to push innovation, and when he reached IT, and no innovation could happen without involving IT, then they said, yes, that's perfectly all right. You just need to fill in the right forms and create a business case, and then it will have to go through the loops and hoops. And when that's finished and you fail that, you'll try to do it again and again and again. And eventually, we'll be able to deliver something to you that's not really what you wanted, but that's what you specified, right? Because we're really efficient. Yes, we are extremely efficient. We're the factory. So this is my starting point. This is a quote by Mark Weiser. You've probably seen it before, but I think it's one of the sort of most fundamental quotes regarding what IT really is and what digitalization really infers. Right? So the most profound technologies are those that disappear. They weave themselves into the fabric of everyday life until they are indistinguishable from it. Right? So something has happened with this technology. It has sort of disappeared. It's become pervasive, right? It's everywhere. We can't chisel it out from the organization. We know that the organization is extremely dependent upon this new crude oil, right? The data. But we have a very hard time delimiting it from the rest, right? Which makes it really hard to manage, right? So Mark's ideas here are sort of the first instance, and this was back in 1991, where we saw that, well, this is actually happening. Digitization is really on the move and creating an entirely new environment for innovation. What we started focusing on was models, right? And this is the Merriam-Webster definition of a model, a set of ideas and numbers that describe the past, present, and future state of something. And we got this idea that, well, in order to make a wonderful analysis, right, you'll be extremely path-dependent on the models that you employ, right? So the underlying sort of the delimitation of value will be directly related to the models. Then we started looking at, well, how are organizations actually working with model innovation, right? How are they changing the underlying prerequisites for analysis? And we found out that they're not, right? And academia is a very large part of this, because the latest I'm an accountant. I work with management accounting. So we looked at, well, when was the latest innovation stemming from management accounting research? And we found out that it was 1954. Right? That was the last time we actually gave you something that could be used, right? And that was sort of the prerequisites for balanced scorecard, which, as it turned out, had several faults in it, since it's teleologically not correct. So, I mean, we're sort of at a loss. We look at organizations where they still use standard. How many of you guys still use standard costing? Come on. I know there's some of you out there. Absolutely, and this is sort of inherited from previous mergers and acquisitions, and then, well, something happens, but we really don't have a clue about the underlying organizational models or the underlying models that actually delimit our thinking. And this relates back to sort of one of the rock stars within philosophy, Ludwig Wittgenstein, who talked about, well, the borders of our language are also the borders of our mind, right? So if we can't describe it, if we don't have the sort of terminology, if we don't have the right reference models in play, then we won't be able to do anything interesting, and we won't be able to change, right? So this is one of the sort of core ideas. I guess you guys have seen this, right? Have you seen it? Well, some of you maybe. This is the Allied forces in Afghanistan's attempts at understanding and capturing how they are supposed to combat the insurgents and create peace and stability in Afghanistan, right? It's a great slide. I really love this. I'm guessing that somebody from Accenture or McKinsey was involved here, right? It's really, and it gives you sort of the understanding that, well, as long as we can sort of Western alliation backlash, well, that only impacts relative message quality in government versus institutions, right? Which is in itself a direct product of institutional strategic community, blah, 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 blah. So, when this was reported, right, the first general the responsible general in question, he said, well, when we'll understand that slide, we'll have won the war, right? So he got the boot. So he was exited from the organization. And the new guy, he was a little bit more of a thinker, I would say. So he said, well, this is kind of dangerous because it gives us the impression that we actually have control. Yeah, right? So the model actually gives us some sort of a, I don't know what the English term, but in Sweden we would say a snuttefilt, right? So it gives you some sort of it's a pacifier, right? And that's, well, that might not be the best sort of prerequisites for tackling a dynamic environment, such as insurgency in Afghanistan. This is the process of doing research in organizations related to models, right? So back in the day, something died, right? And then it sort of went into the ground, it became a skeleton, and it became a fossil. And eventually, we'll sort of try to chisel it out. When we chisel it out, we'll see, well, this thing has large teeth, so it's probably a tyrannosaur, right? But the problem is that there's a lot of these fossils lying around, so the bones get all tangled up, right? So we sort of have a hard time. And if you want to work with data innovation, you'll be stuck in this situation where you've got all these models lying around, right? You've got all these reference models lying around. And they're not really, in some cases, they're directly contradictory, right? So there is this issue of sort of sediments. And as the organization matures, I mean, we for instance, we study SKF a lot, right? And that's an over 100 years old organization. Right? So you can imagine the layers of sediments in place here. right? The taken for granted, the assumptions underlying everything, fiddling about with the sort of potential for data innovation. This is a really difficult task, but I think that it's extremely necessary, and I'll relate back to that later on. So you guys all know the sort of onslaught of new data available, right? And we're just sort of at the pivoting point right now. So there's a lot of data available, right? There's also a large set of complexities involved, right? If we look at, for instance, the latest polls that came in right now show that, well, we've decreased our scope of planning from 5 years on a European level to 3 years, right? So we're continuously decreasing our scope of planning, right? So the level of control that we have related back to Stalin, I mean, 5-year plans work for Stalin. They did, but today, for an organization, 5-year plans, not so much, at least not operatively, right? So complexity is going up. Dynamics in the environment is going up. We're sort of, I've been working with the taxi services. I mean, they never saw Uber coming. I've been working with hotels. They never saw Airbnb coming. As Henrik was talking about, I mean, these radical digital disruptions are, I mean, you can't plan for them. The only thing that you can actually do is, well, try to be as flexible as possible in terms of how you derive value from the data that you have, right? But that's the problem here. Because when we look at the models, they're not changing. Nothing is changing on the model layer, right? Which leads to an opportunity cost, right? So the difference between the level of sort of change going on the model layer and the level of change going on the data, on the sort of crude materials for actually being able to make better decisions, that's a massive opportunity cost. And we're not really highlighting this enough, I think. This is something that's sort of, we don't talk about it. We don't like to talk about it. We like to talk about the opportunities of making better decisions, but we sort of waiver the right to actually say that, well, this is a massive opportunity cost that we're actually sitting with right now. And in the words of Jack Welch, former CEO of General Electric, if the rate of change on the outside exceeds the rate of change on the inside, the end is near. Right? Anybody feel like this? Could anybody in here actually say that the rate of change on the inside exceeds that on the outside? I would guess not, at least if you're in an organization larger than one person, right? So, and one of the things that actually, or one of the core fundamentals of why it's so hard to make changes or management innovations internally is related to our incapacity to actually revitalize and revisit our underlying models and assumptions. We see it everywhere. We work with companies like Ericsson, Volvo Cars, Volvo AB, SKF, et cetera, and they're all in this position. And I'm not trying to sort of push the blame here, but this is really tricky, right? And technology isn't going to save us. Technology has disappeared. Technology has become something that's, well, if we look at the governance models that we have in play, that's conducted by somebody else, all right? And that's a real big problem that we see. So I took the sort of opportunity to actually try to create some sort of a simple guide that you can print and have in your back pocket in order to work with these things. So the first step would be sort of to revisit archaeology, right? To conduct an inventory. Have a look at what's actually underground, right? This is something we're doing with the tax services here in Stockholm right now, or in Sweden. Looking at, well, what are the sort of underlying models? What are the underlying assumptions? Well, they're talking about projects. They're talking about transfer pricing. They're talking about, well, are they actually using that? How are they using it? Or is this just some sort of a sediment that's sort of lying around and only muddles the picture? The next step would be to create what Henrik was talking about with the experimentation, right? Create this sort of neat little team, or create this culture where experimentation is actually on the table, where data innovation can actually happen. But that also relates back to the models. Then we need to revisit our models. We need to create new models, looking at new correlations. And be very careful about equating correlation with causation, right? That's a real bummer. Has anybody read the book Spurious Correlations? If you haven't, I would recommend it. Yeah, you've read it. It's fantastic, right? So there's a very close, or there's a almost 100% correlation between number of deaths of drowning in your home tub and the number of films produced by Bruce Willis, right? So in order to save lives, we need to stop Bruce Willis, right? It's clear, right? That only goes to show the causation is, well, balancing. That's also related back to what Henrik was talking about. We need to be very clear that we're not solely focusing on operational excellence. We're not solely focusing on cost reduction, but we're also focusing on revenue generation, right? And this is also shown in the recent research that came out last week, basically. So for firms that actually have this dual perspective, they outperform the firms that have a single perspective, right? So it's very, very clear. In terms of skills, skepticism, don't assume steady state, optimal or equilibrium. That's the old school. I work at Chalmers. We're teaching this, right? And I'm always pissed off because that's not relevant. Iconoclasm, just burn it to the ground. Build something new. And perseverance. Never, 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 never give up. And change is constant, of course. How was that? Was it okay?
Thank you.
Thank you.